They wanted to see something different, but something different saw them first. The hills have eyes. What began as a vacation ended as a nightmare.
You hell to pay now.
The Hills Have Eyes. The most shocking, terrifying film you will ever see, by Wes Craven, writer and director of The Last House on the Left. The Hills Have Eyes. The lucky ones died first.
In horror cinema, certain films carve a niche for themselves, leaving an enduring mark on the psyche of audiences. The Hills Have Eyes stands as one such iconic entry in the genre, offering a visceral and unsettling experience. At its core, The Hills Have Eyes taps into primal fears, exploiting the vulnerability of humanity. The film's main concept pokes at a fundamental human thought, said best by one of the stars of the film, Dee Wallace. If you're faced with your life or the life of your child, you will find that place in yourself to retaliate, and save yourself and them. For those that don't know, basically the story of The Hills Have Eyes follows the seemingly all-American family, the Carters, who are traveling for vacation to Los Angeles. After a brief stop at a gas station, the Carters break down in the Nevada desert, quickly becoming prey to a clan of mutated, cannibalistic beings that live in the hills. In a family versus family fight, The Hills Have Eyes turns the tables, as the Carter family fights back against the cannibalistic attackers, setting up traps in an all-out fight for survival. The fairy tale influences on The Hills Have Eyes are obvious if one looks for them. You can just see it with a group of monsters in the hills who steal people to eat them. However, what might not be picked up on so quickly is that the story of The Hills Have Eyes is rooted in actual real-life events. The director of The Hills Have Eyes, Wes Craven, found success and controversy in 1972 with his first film, The Last House on the Left. Yet, just a few years later, he was in financial straits. Despite Craven's desire to diversify his directorial portfolio, he found himself struggling to secure opportunities in the film industry. The constraints of the industry and the difficulties in getting projects greenlit led Craven back to the horror genre. Craven's friend, producer Peter Locke, was interested in financing a horror film, and Craven decided to write the project due to his financial issues. Craven first considered creating a horror children's film based on Hansel and Gretel, but Locke wanted the film to be more in the vein of Craven's debut with The Last House on the Left. Searching for a story, Wes Craven went to the New York Public Library and read a book named The Encyclopedia of Murder and Mayhem, trying to get some ideas for this horror film. While thumbing through the book, Craven stumbled upon the legend of Sawney Bean and the cannibalistic Bean clan.
I was just doing general research on murder. Basically, I was in the New York Public Library, found this book called The Encyclopedia of Murder and Mayhem. And it had this great account of a family called the Sawney Bean family in this, I think, 16th century that had been a feral family that was murdering people and literally eating them.
The first account of Sawney Bean came from a jailhouse English tabloid dating back to the 18th century called the Newgate Calendar. As the legend goes, Alexander Sawney Bean was born in the East Lothian region of Scotland sometime in the 16th century. Bean grew up having a distaste in his father's trade and decided to leave home with a woman called Black Angus Douglas, a local who was accused of being a witch. The two of them shared some dark proclivities, including their hatred for the world around them, and more alarmingly, a craving for human flesh. The couple were treated from society, confining themselves in a cave over the sea. This dwelling was allegedly equipped with various tunnels that spanned over a mile in depth, and allowed ample space for the couple to start their brood. The Bean family grew quickly, with Sawney Bean's wife eventually giving birth to 14 kids. With ever-increasing mouths to feed and no real trade to fall back on, Sawney Bean turned to robbery and murder, and it wasn't long until the rest of the family got involved. The Bean family worked together to ambush lone travelers, which they would kill and take their corpses into the cave and keep for food. As time went on, the family continued to grow. The cave eventually became home to 18 grandsons and 14 granddaughters, all born out of incest. The Bean clan eventually numbered 45, and all of them had a desire for human flesh. However, the legend of the Bean clan came to a fitting and grisly end thanks to a Scottish king. As the story goes, one day the Bean family encircled a husband and wife on horseback as they returned from a local fair. The Beans ambushed the couple from behind and took the woman down immediately, gutting her and feasting on her corpse as the husband was fighting off the rest of the group. The husband barreled over several of the Beans with his horse and pulled out both a sword and a pistol until he was released from their grip. By this time, a group of about 30 fellow fairgoers had made their way along the same path, and when the Beans took notice of them, they retreated. The husband eventually made his way to Glasgow, where he begged King James VI to do something about the Bean family. The king is said to then have personally led a mob of 400 men, where they were met with a disturbing scene of carnage, severed limbs, hanging bodies, and piles of stolen loot within the caves. The locals were said to have been so disgusted with the Bean family that they demanded a more painful punishment than just death. As a result, the Bean women were burned alive, and the men were dismembered and left to bleed out. Although some historians disagree, there are no contemporary records to verify the Bean clan existence. There are also no records of the missing persons, the various innkeepers forced to abandon their trades, or even the 400-person manhunt led by the King of Scotland himself. So where did the Sawney Bean legend originate? It is said by some historians that the legend was simply an English propaganda tool against the Scottish. From Scottish historian Dr. Louise Yeoman about the legend, it sounds like the plot for a box office topping horror film, and that's because it was invented to serve a very similar purpose, to sell books. It also has a more sinister subtext. The books it sold were published not in Scotland, but in England, at a time when there was widespread prejudice against Scots. The horrific story of the Bean clan, whether true or not, could be seen throughout The Hills Have Eyes. One direct parallel to the film is Sawney Bean's origin with his father. The patriarch of the cannibal clan and main antagonist of the film, Papa Jupiter, was a disturbed child who was left by his father in the hills. Jupiter is casted out to create his own life in the hills, which then turns into a family when Jupiter has children with a depraved alcoholic prostitute known as Mama. The family led by Papa Jupiter in the film survived by cannibalizing travelers and stealing supplies, exactly like the Bean family. However, the most important parallel to the Bean legend and The Hills Have Eyes was the alleged executions of the Bean family. Director Wes Craven said in an interview in 1977, "I was so struck by how on the one hand you have this feral family that's killing people and eating them, but if you look at them, they weren't doing anything that much worse than the civilization did when they caught them." And I just thought, what a great kind of A-B of culture. How the most civilized can be the most savage, and how the most savage can be civilized. It was the execution that gave Craven the idea of one of the signatures of The Hills Have Eyes, which is that the surviving members of the supposedly civilized suburban Carter family end up resorting to the same viciousness as the hill folk who have attacked them. It took some time for critics and audiences to dig into this theme of The Hills Have Eyes, but regardless, the film was an instant hit. And now decades later, The Hills Have Eyes is a chilling reminder that sometimes reality can be as horrifying as fiction. The harrowing tale of survival and primal fear serves as a stark reflection of the human condition when pushed to the limits. The Hills Have Eyes may be a product of imagination, but its roots tap into a broader landscape of real fears. In the end, it reminds us that the true horror may not always reside in the hills, but in the untamed vastness of human behavior.